Keanu Reeves had always been known as a man who lived far from scandals. He was not the kind of celebrity people usually saw in the gossip magazines or in messy controversies. Instead, he lived quietly, riding the subway like an ordinary passenger, buying coffee without a fuss and even donating to charities without asking for attention. For this reason, when people heard that Keanu Reeves had to appear in court, it sent a wave of surprise across the public. The courtroom was filled with an unusual silence that morning. Reporters had gathered outside the building, hoping to capture a glimpse of the Hollywood star in such an unexpected setting. Fans too had shown up, lining the steps and whispering among themselves. They wondered why someone like him, who was famous for being humble and private, would be standing before a judge. Many believed there must be some mistake. Others assumed it was just a misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy. The sound of shuffling papers, the squeak of chairs, and the low murmurs of lawyers preparing their notes added to the tense atmosphere. When the door finally opened and Keanu Reeves walked in, all eyes turned toward him. He was dressed in a simple black suit, nothing flashy. No trace of the Hollywood glamour that people often associated with stars. His calm walk and soft expression made it clear he was not trying to play the part of a famous actor. He was there as an ordinary man facing an unusual situation. Some people expected him to look nervous, but Keanu carried himself with quiet confidence. He greeted the court staff politely, and even nodded at a few strangers in the room as if they were old acquaintances. This natural kindness confused those who came to see a drama. They expected tension, perhaps a sign of arrogance from a rich actor, but instead, they saw a man who seemed completely grounded. The case itself was not a crime story, it was a civil matter. The kind of dispute that normally would not make headlines. Yet because his name was attached to it, the situation attracted enormous attention. A disagreement over rights and contracts had unexpectedly placed him at the center of legal proceedings, and while such things were common in the industry, no one had imagined Keanu himself would have to stand in front of a judge. As he took his seat, whispers floated around the courtroom. Some people leaned closer to catch every detail. Others stared as if they could not believe their eyes. To many, it felt strange to see the beloved actor, who often played strong and heroic characters on screen, sitting quietly in a wooden chair under the harsh lights of a courtroom. It was almost surreal. The difference between the silver screen and real life was clearer than ever in that moment. Keanu himself did not appear shaken. He sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, listening carefully as lawyers began their formal introductions. His face carried no sign of irritation, no flash of ego. He looked like a man who simply wanted the process to move forward. His calm behavior drew respect from some of the court staff, who later admitted they had never seen a celebrity behave so normally in such circumstances. For many observers, this part of the story was captivating, because it broke the usual pattern of celebrity news. It was not about reckless behavior, scandals, or pride. It was about a man whose reputation for humility was being tested in an unexpected place. The sight of Keanu Reeves walking into a courtroom was enough to make headlines across the nation, and people who never cared for celebrity gossip suddenly found themselves talking about it at work, at school, and in coffee shops. What added to the intrigue was how different the reality was from people's expectations. Instead of seeing a Hollywood superstar trying to use power or influence, they saw someone who looked almost like a regular citizen. There was no army of bodyguards, no loud entourage, just Keanu walking in, sitting down and respecting the process. That simple act made the moment powerful. It showed that even someone adored around the world could find themselves in the same situation as any ordinary person. This unexpected court appearance also reminded people of Keanu's past. They recalled his modest lifestyle, his losses in life, and the way he had always remained humble despite his fame. Many whispered to one another that if anyone could handle this situation with dignity, it would be him. In a way, the courtroom became more than a legal space. It became a stage where character was on display. And from the very first moment, Keanu was already showing who he truly was. By the time the first session began, it was clear to everyone in the room that this was not going to be just another case. The presence of Keanu Reeves gave the entire proceeding a different weight. People leaned forward in their seats, eager to see how the actor they admired on screen would respond to the challenges of real life. They expected drama, but what they witnessed was something even more striking. Quiet grace, simple manners, and an aura of sincerity that filled the room. The unexpected court appearance of Keanu Reeves was not just about a legal issue. It was about the story of a man stepping into a place where the rules were the same for everyone. For many, that was the beginning of a larger lesson, a reminder that fame does not place anyone above the law, and humility can make even the strangest moments meaningful. The world outside the courtroom waited eagerly for updates, not knowing that this quiet entry into the legal world would soon spark a reaction far greater than anyone could have imagined. When the judge entered the courtroom, the room stood in silence. Everyone rose to their feet as tradition demanded, and then sat back down as the proceedings were about to begin. The judge was an older man with sharp features and an expression that often made people feel small. He had been on the bench for many years, and he carried himself with the authority of someone who was used to being listened to without question. As his eyes scanned the room, they fell on Keanu Reeves sitting quietly in the front. For a brief second there was a pause. The judge raised his eyebrows, and then, to everyone's shock, he let out a short laugh. It was not a laugh of joy or kindness. It was the kind of laugh that suggested disbelief, almost as if he found the sight amusing. The sound echoed in the courtroom, breaking the tense silence. The audience inside the room shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at each other in disbelief. They could not understand why the judge would react this way. After all, Keanu had done nothing unusual. He had entered politely, taken his seat, and waited for the case to begin. The laughter seemed unnecessary, even dismissive, as if the judge was mocking the very idea that a Hollywood star could be sitting before him. Keanu, however, did not flinch. His face remained calm, his hands resting on his lap. He did not respond with anger or even confusion. Instead, he sat still, looking straight ahead. It was almost as if he had heard the laughter but chose to let it pass. His silence only made the moment more powerful. The contrast between the judge's reaction and Keanu's calm presence was striking. The judge leaned back in his chair, still shaking his head slightly. He then made a remark under his breath, something about how unusual it was to see movie people involved in real legal matters. The words were not loud, but they were enough for those nearby to catch. Once again, the reaction in the room was divided. Some chuckled nervously, unsure whether they should follow the judge's lead. Others frowned, feeling that his behavior was unprofessional. Courtrooms are supposed to be places of fairness and respect. Yet in that moment, many felt the balance had been broken. The judge's laughter seemed to reduce the seriousness of the situation, almost as if he had already formed an opinion before hearing a single argument. Lawyers exchanged glances, whispering quietly to their clients. Even they seemed surprised by how openly dismissive the judge appeared. For those watching, the scene carried more weight than anyone could have predicted. This was not just about a case. It was about how a person, no matter how famous, was treated in a system that promised equality. To laugh at someone before hearing their side was more than just a small slip of behavior. It symbolized something deeper, a reminder that power in the wrong hands can appear careless. Outside the courtroom, reporters who had managed to get whispers of what happened quickly prepared their notes. The idea of a judge laughing at Keanu Reeves was too sensational to ignore. News like this did not stay hidden for long. It was the kind of detail that would capture headlines, spark debates, and raise questions about professionalism. But in that moment inside the room, it was still raw and uncomfortable. Keanu sat quietly, and while he said nothing, his body language spoke volumes. He did not roll his eyes, did not sigh, did not look around for support. Instead, he simply listened, as though he had expected such treatment. It was almost as if his years of facing challenges in his personal life had prepared him to remain calm when others tried to undermine him. The judge's laughter, intended or not, only highlighted the grace with which Keanu carried himself. People in the gallery whispered softly to each other. Some were fans who had come only to see the actor, but now they found themselves witnessing something far more human. They were not just watching a celebrity in court. They were seeing a man remain composed while someone in authority attempted to belittle him. The more the judge dismissed him, the more respect Keanu seemed to gain in the eyes of those present. The laughter might have lasted only a few seconds, but its impact stretched far beyond that room. For the witnesses, it was unforgettable. For Keanu, it was just another moment where he chose silence over pride. And for the judge, it was a decision that would later follow him, though he did not realize it yet at that instant. He simply moved forward with the case, unaware that the brief laugh would soon be replayed and discussed by millions. This single moment created a strange atmosphere, On one side sat authority, on the other side sat humility. One tried to assert power with laughter, the other answered with silence. It was a clash without words, yet the message was clear. Respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned. And while the judge had the title and the robe, it was Keanu's calm strength that began to win the respect of the people watching. By the end of that session, the mood in the courtroom had shifted. What started as a simple case had turned into something larger. People no longer looked at Keanu with simple curiosity. They looked at him with admiration. On the other hand, the judge, who had perhaps thought nothing of his laughter, was slowly becoming the center of judgment himself. The seed of controversy had been planted, and it would not stay hidden for long. The judge's laughter might have unsettled many people in the courtroom, but Keanu Reeves did not change his expression. He sat there quietly, as if the sound of mockery had never reached his ears. His calmness was almost surprising, because most people in such a moment would have shifted in their seat, frowned, or shown some sign of discomfort. But Keanu simply stayed still, his posture straight, his hands resting gently on his lap and his face relaxed. It was not the calmness of arrogance. It was the calmness of someone who had learned over time how to control his emotions even in the most difficult situations for years. Keanu had faced hardships that were far heavier than a laugh from a judge. He had experienced personal loss, tragedies, and endless rumors from the media. Those experiences had shaped him into a man who knew how to stay grounded when the world around him became noisy. People in the gallery whispered softly, pointing out how unusual it was. Any other celebrity, they said, would have rolled their eyes or argued back. Some might have demanded respect from the court. Others might have even walked out in protest. But here was Keanu Reeves sitting silently, showing respect to the process even though respect was not being shown to him. That alone caught the attention of everyone in the room. Even the lawyers noticed it. The attorney sitting beside Keanu gave him a cautious glance, perhaps expecting him to be irritated. But when he saw the calm look on his client's face, he relaxed a little. It was clear Keanu did not want to escalate anything. He was there to listen, to follow the process, and to let his actions speak louder than words. That quiet patience was not only rare in court, it was admirable. Keanu's demeanor was more than just silence. It carried a sense of dignity. The way he looked straight ahead, the way he avoided unnecessary gestures, and the way he kept his breathing steady gave off the impression of inner strength. He did not need to fight with words. His calmness itself became his answer. For many in the audience, it was like watching a lesson in self-control. Some people felt almost embarrassed on behalf of the judge. The laughter that was meant to make Keanu small instead made him appear larger in character. The contrast was so sharp that even those who had no strong opinion about him before were now quietly admiring the way he carried himself. It was proof that you do not need to raise your voice to make an impact. Sometimes silence is more powerful than sound. The reporters present in the room scribbled in their notebooks. They wrote down not just what the judge had said, but also how Keanu had reacted. They knew that when the story reached the public, it would not be the judge's laugh that people admired. It would be Keanu's grace under pressure. His behavior had already created a narrative of humility and strength, without him uttering a single word. As the hearing continued, there were moments when the judge's tone remained sharp. At times the lawyers argued passionately, raising their voices and pointing at documents. But even in those moments, Keanu stayed the same, calm and composed. He leaned forward when he needed to listen, nodded politely when addressed, and never once interrupted or looked frustrated. His ability to maintain that steady presence became the highlight of the day. For many ordinary people watching, his demeanor felt relatable. Everyone has faced a situation where someone in authority or power tried to belittle them. Most of the time, the natural instinct is to defend ourselves quickly, to fight back with words. Yet Keanu's example showed something different. He showed that by staying calm, by refusing to feed into the negativity, a person could actually rise above the situation. Even those who were not fans of his films left the courtroom with a new respect for him. They spoke quietly to one another about how unusual it was to see someone so famous act so modestly. One woman whispered that she had expected him to behave like a spoiled star, but instead, he looked like any ordinary man who believed in doing things the right way. That simple truth made the moment powerful. What made his composure even more interesting was that it did not feel forced. Some people put on a mask of calmness to hide their irritation, but Keanu's silence seemed genuine. His eyes carried no anger, his shoulders no tension. He gave the impression of someone who had fully accepted the moment and decided to handle it with grace. That authenticity was what made the people in the room believe in him even more. As the day went on, Keanu's composed demeanor became the center of attention. Lawyers argued, papers shuffled, and the judge gave instructions. But the memory that stuck with people was not the legal jargon. It was the image of a man who remained still and graceful while being laughed at. The more people thought about it, the more they admired the strength behind that quietness. By the time the session ended, the story had already taken shape in the minds of those who were present. Keanu Reeves, the actor known for his humble life, had once again shown his true character in a place where most people would have broken under the pressure. The judge's laughter may have been loud, but Keanu's silence was louder. It was a silence that spoke of strength, patience, and dignity, and it was that silence that people would remember when they left the courthouse. When the court session ended that day, no one could have imagined how quickly the story would spread outside the walls of that room. At first, it was just a few reporters writing notes and photographers waiting by the courthouse steps. But soon, whispers about what had happened inside began to flow through the crowd. Someone mentioned the judge laughing. Another described Keanu's silence. And within hours, the tale had begun to travel far beyond the courthouse. The first reports appeared online in small entertainment blogs. They wrote short articles with headlines like, "Judge laughs at Keanu Reeves" or "Unexpected scene in courtroom." These stories were shared quickly on social media, where fans were always searching for news about their favorite actor. What began as a local courtroom detail soon transformed into a topic that everyone wanted to discuss. People were not just curious about the legal case. They were more interested in the human moment they had heard about. The idea of a powerful judge laughing at a man who was known for his humility struck a nerve. Readers asked questions in the comment sections. Why would a judge laugh at someone in such a serious place? Why did Keanu stay so quiet? Could this really have happened the way it was described? The curiosity grew by the minute. Clips began to surface too. A journalist had managed to record a short video from inside the courtroom. It was shaky and not very clear, but it captured the exact moment when the judge chuckled and Keanu stayed completely calm. That short clip spread like wildfire. Within a single day, it was shared thousands of times. People paused the video, zoomed in on Keanu's expression, and discussed how he looked so peaceful despite the judge's mocking tone. News stations picked up the story. They ran segments about the courtroom scene, inviting legal experts, psychologists, and even fans to comment on it. The focus of their discussions was not only about the case but about the behavior on display. They questioned whether the judge had shown disrespect, and they praised Keanu for his control. The more the story aired, the more people joined in the conversation. Until then, it had been a courtroom event. Now, it was turning into a national debate. On platforms like Twitter and Facebook, hashtags began trending. Phrases like, "Respect Keanu" and "Justice with Dignity" started appearing in posts from people all around the country. Memes were created, some showing Keanu sitting calmly while the judge's laugh was exaggerated with cartoon bubbles. Others compared the moment to scenes from his movies, where his characters remained strong under pressure. What had started as a single laugh in a courtroom was now shaping internet culture. What made the story even more powerful was the way fans defended Keanu. They spoke of his kindness in real life, sharing old stories of him giving up his subway seat, donating secretly to hospitals, or speaking gently with strangers. They argued that if anyone deserved respect in that courtroom, it was him. Every personal story about his generosity added fuel to the fire. People felt that the judge's behavior was not just rude, it was unjust. In workplaces, schools, and coffee shops, the story became a popular topic. Some people argued that the judge was only surprised and did not mean harm. Others insisted that laughing in court, especially at a person who had done nothing wrong, was unacceptable. The discussions were not just about Keanu. They were about fairness, respect, and how people in power should behave. Keanu himself did not speak about the incident at first, but his silence outside the courtroom only increased people's admiration. The public saw him walking quietly to his car, waving politely at fans and refusing to make any dramatic statements. That calmness reminded people of what they had seen in the courtroom. It reinforced the image of him as someone who lived with humility. no matter how much attention surrounded him. As days passed, the story reached international news. Papers in Europe, Asia, and South America reported it. Readers in other countries reacted with the same mix of shock and admiration. They were surprised that a judge could behave in such a way. But they were also deeply impressed by Keanu's ability to remain composed. The incident became a symbol, not just in one country but across the world. The turning of the public eye was not gentle, it was sudden, loud, and overwhelming. What had been a small court matter was now a headline seen by millions. People who had never even watched one of Keanu's films knew about his courtroom silence, and many of them praised it as a lesson in dignity. The laughter of the judge had created a ripple, but Keanu's silence had turned that ripple into a wave. Soon, commentators began to write longer pieces about what the moment represented. Some said it was a reflection of how society values humility. Others said it showed the danger of arrogance in positions of authority. No matter the angle, all agreed on one thing. Keanu Reeves had shown character, and that character was what people admired most. By the end of the week, the public's focus had shifted completely. They were less interested in the details of the legal case and more interested in the meaning of what had happened. The judge's laugh was now remembered as a mistake, while Keanu's calm response was remembered as wisdom. The story had grown far beyond the courtroom walls, and the whole nation was now watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The story of the judge laughing at Keanu Reeves spread faster than anyone expected. At first, people were only curious, but soon curiosity turned into strong emotions. The moment the clip began to circulate online, thousands of comments poured in, and most of them were filled with anger. People could not believe that a judge, a person trusted to be fair and respectful, had mocked a man who had done nothing wrong. On Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, outrage was everywhere. Some people wrote that the judge had embarrassed not only Keanu, but also the justice system. Others said the laughter showed arrogance. Many people explained that a courtroom should be the most serious and respectful place, and to laugh at someone in that setting was unforgivable. What made the outrage stronger was Keanu's behavior. His silence, his calm face, and his respectful attitude made the judge's laughter look even worse. People compared the two men side by side, one with power who chose mockery, and the other with humility who chose silence. The contrast made the public furious, and they began to demand answers. Talk shows invited guests to discuss the incident. Some experts said the judge's behavior was unprofessional and could even be seen as bias. Others argued that maybe the judge did not mean harm, but even they admitted it was a mistake. Audiences watching at home reacted with passion, calling into radio shows, sending emails to networks, and sharing their own views. It was no longer just about Keanu. It was about respect. The outrage grew so large that even people who were not fans of Keanu Reeves joined the conversation. They saw the moment as unfair. They saw it as a symbol of how people in power sometimes treat others as less important. It became a topic that touched not only movie fans, but ordinary citizens who wanted fairness in every corner of society. Celebrities also added their voices. A few actors posted messages on social media saying they stood with Keanu. Musicians, athletes, and even writers joined in, praising his calmness and criticizing the judge's laugh. Each statement added fuel to the fire, making the outrage spread even further. It was no longer just a viral video. It had become a national movement of opinion. Memes and artwork filled the internet. Some people created drawings of Keanu sitting calmly while waves of anger surrounded the judge. Others turned his silence into inspirational quotes. Screenshots of the courtroom clip were shared with captions like, "Dignity speaks louder than power." The creative energy of the people turned the outrage into something even bigger. The outrage also reached official platforms. Letters were sent to legal authorities asking for an investigation. Online petitions gathered tens of thousands of signatures demanding that the judge be questioned about his behavior. For many people, this was not about punishing him. It was about holding him accountable. If ordinary people had to behave respectfully in court, then judges should be held to the same standard. In homes across the country, families discussed the story during dinner. Parents told their children that Keanu's silence was the right way to respond. Teachers mentioned the incident in classrooms as an example of patience and strength. The outrage had started with anger, but it slowly turned into something more. It became a lesson people wanted to share. What shocked many observers was how quickly the mood of the nation shifted. Just a few days earlier, people were living their normal lives, watching shows, working, and scrolling through their phones. Now suddenly, everyone seemed to have an opinion about a courtroom moment. It showed the power of public unity. When people see something unfair, they speak loudly, and together their voices become impossible to ignore. Keanu himself did not comment directly on the outrage. He appeared in public once or twice, smiling politely, thanking fans, and avoiding any dramatic statements. His silence during this storm only made people respect him more. Some said he was wise not to add fuel to the fire. Others said his humility proved once again why so many admired him. The outrage continued to grow even without him saying a single word. News anchors began describing it as more than just a celebrity story. They said it had turned into a reflection of society's values. People wanted dignity, fairness, and humility from those in power. The judge's laugh became a symbol of arrogance, and Keanu's silence became a symbol of grace. These symbols were easy for people to connect with, and that is why the outrage reached every corner of the country. By the end of the week, it was clear the outrage was not slowing down. More articles were written, more interviews were broadcast, and more people joined the conversation. What had started as a single laugh inside one courtroom had now become a national debate about respect, authority, and humility. The whole nation was not just reacting to a video. They were reacting to what it meant. The judge probably never imagined that a few seconds of laughter would create such a storm. But the people had spoken. Their outrage was loud, clear, and united. And at the center of it all was Keanu Reeves, who had said nothing, done nothing except remain calm, and yet inspired a nation to think deeply about respect and dignity. The outrage across the nation quickly turned into pressure. People were not satisfied with just talking about what happened. They wanted accountability. The judge who had laughed at Keanu Reeves suddenly found himself at the center of attention, not only from the public but also from the very institutions that once supported him. At first, the judge seemed confident. He believed the story would fade away in a few days. After all, news cycles often moved quickly. One scandal replaced another, and people usually forgot. But this time it was different. The clip of his laughter kept spreading. The discussions grew louder, and instead of disappearing, the story seemed to grow bigger every single day. Newspapers began publishing opinion pieces questioning his behavior. Legal experts reminded the public that judges were expected to remain neutral, respectful, and serious at all times. They argued that the laugh, even if unintentional, was a failure of professionalism. More than that, it gave the impression of prejudice, and in the world of law, even the smallest hint of prejudice could damage trust. Professional watchdogs took notice. Committees responsible for monitoring judges started receiving complaints from citizens. Letters, emails, and petitions arrived in large numbers. Many of them demanded an investigation. They argued that if an ordinary citizen had shown disrespect in court, they would have been punished immediately. So why should a judge be allowed to behave this way? The judge's colleagues also felt the pressure. In private conversations, some admitted they were embarrassed. They worried that his actions made the entire judicial system look arrogant. Others tried to defend him, saying perhaps it was just a nervous laugh or a misunderstanding. But no matter how they tried to explain it, the public was not willing to forgive so easily. Television shows brought in retired judges to give their opinions. Some of them were gentle, saying the incident was unfortunate but not career-ending. Others were harsh, calling it shameful and disrespectful. Each discussion put more eyes on the judge. Each comment added weight to the scrutiny he was under. The more people talked, the more his reputation began to crack. The judge himself tried to remain silent. He refused interviews, avoided cameras, and carried on with his daily duties as if nothing had happened. But silence did not help him the way it had helped Keanu. For Keanu, silence was strength. For the judge, silence looked like avoidance. People wanted him to acknowledge what he had done. They wanted an apology, but none came soon. The story reached official hearings. The legal board responsible for reviewing conduct announced that they were looking into the matter. Those words alone were enough to make headlines. It meant that what started as a laugh had now become a serious issue that could affect his career. His authority, once unquestioned, was now being doubted. In the courtroom where the incident happened, the staff felt the change. People whispered more carefully. Reporters showed up outside almost every day, hoping to catch a glimpse of the judge. The once ordinary courthouse had become the stage for a national scandal. Everyone knew the eyes of the nation were watching. Meanwhile, Keanu's name was mentioned in every report. His calm response was always compared to the judge's dismissive laughter. The more Keanu was praised, the more the judge was criticized. It became almost impossible to talk about one without mentioning the other. On one side stood humility, on the other stood arrogance. That comparison made the judge's position even weaker. Even within his own chambers there was tension. Some of his assistants advised him to make a public statement, to apologize and to show humility, but he refused, believing that his years of service and authority were enough to protect him. What he failed to realize was that authority without respect is fragile, and the respect he once held was slipping away with each passing day. The scrutiny was not just professional, it was personal too. Neighbors whispered, strangers pointed, and his family had to face questions they were not prepared for. His private life, which had always been kept away from public view, was now being discussed on social media. Every action he took outside the courtroom was analyzed. Even his silence at home became part of the story. What made the scrutiny heavier was the fact that people saw this incident as a symbol. It was no longer about one judge and one actor. It was about fairness, humility, and accountability. People wanted to believe that no one, not even a judge, was above the standards of respect. That belief gave their voices power, and that power pressed down on him every single day. As weeks passed, the judge looked more tired. His once sharp confidence seemed to fade. He walked with slower steps. His expressions no longer carried the same authority. The laughter that had once slipped from his mouth so easily now weighed on him like a burden. He had underestimated the public, and now the public was holding him accountable. The scrutiny reached its peak when an official notice was released. The Board of Judicial Conduct confirmed that they were formally reviewing his case. For many people, that was a victory. It meant their voices had been heard. It meant justice was not only for the powerful, but also for the people. The judge, once untouchable, was now being judged himself. What started as a single moment of arrogance had become a turning point in his career. The laughter that was supposed to be small and harmless had instead pulled him under a spotlight he could not escape. And while he had once been the man with authority in that courtroom, now he was the man being examined by the very nation he was supposed to serve. When reporters finally gathered the courage to ask Keanu Reeves about the incident in court, everyone waited eagerly to hear his response. People wanted to know if he was angry, if he was insulted, or if he wanted to take action against the judge. The cameras flashed, microphones were pushed toward him, and fans leaned forward as if his words would decide the next chapter of the story. But Keanu did not show anger. His voice was soft, steady, and calm. He simply said that he respected the court system. He added that judges carried heavy responsibilities, and sometimes moments were misunderstood. He reminded everyone that his case was not about personal feelings, but about resolving an issue through the proper process. His answer was short, but it was powerful. The reporters were surprised. They had expected drama. They had expected headlines filled with sharp words. Instead, Keanu gave them humility. He made no demand for punishment, no complaint about the treatment. He acted as if the laughter had not hurt him at all. In fact, his words almost sounded like forgiveness. That calmness became the real headline. When his response was broadcast on television, people across the country were moved. They could not believe how a man could be mocked in front of so many and still choose kindness. Social media lit up again, but this time it was filled with admiration. People wrote that Keanu had once again shown why he was different from other celebrities. He was not a man of pride, he was a man of patience. In interviews that followed, journalists tried to press him further. They asked if he thought the judge had been unfair. They asked if he felt embarrassed, but Keanu kept repeating the same message. He said he wanted to focus on the case, not the laughter. He said respect was something he always tried to give. No matter the situation, each time he spoke, his calmness spread like a wave, touching people who listened. Fans began to share old stories of Keanu again, reminding the world of his generosity. They said this was just another example of his character, a man who had faced personal tragedies, who had seen pain and yet had never turned bitter. Now the nation was seeing what those close to him already knew. His kindness was not for show, it was part of who he truly was. Some people argued that he should have fought back. They said silence only allowed arrogance to win. But even they had to admit that his choice of peace had created a much bigger impact. By refusing to fight with words, he had made the judge's behavior look even smaller. His response reminded everyone that sometimes the strongest answer is no answer at all. The public compared his behavior with the judge's. The judge had laughed. Keanu had stayed silent. The judge had been dismissive. Keanu had been respectful. The difference was so clear that it became impossible to ignore. Commentators on television described Keanu's response as grace under pressure, and articles praised him for showing dignity where most people would have shown anger. His calmness also made the outrage more powerful. People said if Keanu himself could forgive, then it was even more important for the system to hold the judge accountable. His humility did not reduce the seriousness of what happened. Instead, it made the demand for fairness even stronger. People felt protective of him, as if his gentleness deserved to be defended. As days passed, Keanu's response became a symbol. Memes appeared with his quote about respecting the court system. Fans created posters online with his calm face and words like strength in silence. Schools and motivational speakers even began mentioning his response as an example of how to handle disrespect with dignity. It was no longer just news, it was a lesson. When he was asked again about the nationwide outrage, Keanu shook his head gently and smiled. He said people should not waste their energy on anger for him. He said he was fine. He thanked his supporters but urged them to focus on kindness rather than hate. His words calmed some of the storm, but they also deepened the admiration, because not many people could show that kind of humility when the whole world was on their side. Even international media noticed his response. Newspapers around the world printed his quotes, praising the way he handled the situation. They called him a man of peace. Some even compared him to spiritual figures, saying his patience was rare in the world of fame and power. The incident had started in one courtroom, but his response had now inspired people across oceans. Back in the courtroom, when Keanu appeared again for the next hearing, the atmosphere was different. There was no laughter this time. Everyone, including the judge, was more careful, more quiet. The respect that Keanu had shown began to reflect back at him. It was clear that his calm response had changed the tone of everything around him. His choice of humility did not just protect his dignity, it raised him higher. The nation, already outraged by the judge's actions, now admired Keanu even more. They saw him as a man who did not let pride control him, who chose peace over revenge, and who reminded them that true strength does not always need to be loud. His response became the heart of the story, and it was that response that turned a courtroom laugh into a lesson for millions. The story that began with a single laugh inside a courtroom did not end there. It grew into something bigger, something that reached far beyond the case itself. For days and weeks, people across the country, and even across the world, kept talking about it. And slowly, the moment stopped being just about Keanu Reeves or the judge. It became a lesson, a mirror reflecting values that people wanted to see more of in their own lives. Everywhere, people repeated the same thought. Dignity matters, respect matters, humility matters. The nation had seen two very different behaviors in the same room. On one side, a man with authority who chose mockery. On the other, a man with fame who chose silence and respect. That contrast opened the eyes of many. They realized that power does not always mean wisdom, and silence does not always mean weakness. In schools, teachers told the story to students. They explained how Keanu's calmness showed a strength that shouting could never achieve. They told young people that responding with patience could sometimes be more powerful than fighting back. In offices, workers discussed the incident over lunch, comparing it to times when they had been treated unfairly by bosses or colleagues. They agreed that Keanu's choice was rare, but it was the kind of behavior that made the world better. Families also discussed it around dinner tables. Parents reminded their children that respect should never be lost even when others fail to show it. They said that Keanu's example was proof that kindness and patience were not signs of weakness, but signs of character. The story became more than entertainment. It became a teaching moment. News programs and newspapers turned the courtroom laugh into thoughtful articles. They wrote about fairness, accountability, and the need for humility from those in power. They explained that society trusted judges, teachers, leaders, and officials to act with dignity, and when they failed, it hurt everyone. The lesson was clear. No matter your position, you are never too high to treat others with respect. Keanu himself did not try to make the lesson bigger. He simply lived it, his silence, his forgiveness, and his gentle words allowed the story to grow naturally. He did not tell people what to learn, but people learned anyway. That was the beauty of it. The lesson did not come from speeches or demands, it came from actions. Around the world, the story connected with people who had faced unfairness. A student who had been laughed at by a teacher, a worker who had been dismissed by a boss, a child who had been teased by stronger classmates. They all saw themselves in Keanu's position, and his calm strength gave them hope. It reminded them that they too could rise above mockery, not by fighting but by holding on to dignity. The judge's role in the story became the warning. People said this is what happens when authority is not balanced with humility. His laugh, once small and careless, became a symbol of arrogance. It showed how one moment of disrespect could erase years of service. It reminded people that no matter how much power someone has, they are still responsible for their behavior. The larger lesson also touched on the power of unity. Millions of people spoke together. Their outrage showed that society still cared deeply about respect and fairness. But even in their anger, they were guided by the calmness of Keanu's response. They admired him not because he shouted louder, but because he stayed quiet and dignified. That balance between outrage and admiration turned the moment into a nationwide reflection. Artists, writers, and speakers began to use the story as an example. Motivational talks mentioned it as proof that character shines brightest in difficult moments. Poems were written, songs were shared, and inspirational posters carried Keanu's image with words like strength in silence and dignity above all. The lesson had grown into culture, into art, into daily life. And so the laugh that was meant to belittle ended up doing the opposite. It lifted Keanu even higher in the eyes of the people. It reminded the world that greatness does not come from power or position. It comes from character. It comes from the way a person behaves when tested. In this story, Keanu did not need to win an argument. His silence was the victory by the end of it all. The case itself almost faded into the background. Few people even remembered what the legal matter was about. What they remembered was the moment a judge laughed, and the way Keanu responded with calm dignity. That was the true story. That was the larger lesson that people carried with them. The nation walked away with a reminder that respect cannot be demanded. It must be given freely. Authority cannot protect you from arrogance, and humility can turn even the harshest moment into inspiration. Keanu Reeves had not asked for this lesson to be written, but through his actions it became part of his legacy, a legacy not of movies or fame but of kindness, humility, and grace in the face of disrespect.